Well, happy afternoon to you, Scott Baker.
Mikey, how are you? I told you so. I'm not saying that to you. The headline of the field note is, I told you so.
I felt it though when you said it,
You
right? I
did.
felt it. I
Yeah.
immediately got like hackles up and defensive.
Well, the rest of the headline is, I told you so is Leadership Profanity. A
I love
great
it.
title for an admired
Yeah.
leadership field note. Glad
Yeah.
you could be with us on Lead Better to talk about it. And I think that there's a part of us, because you had that instinctive reaction, we all go, well, yeah. But there's some things to think about, not only in terms of what this means, but I'm going to add in a factor or two about why leaders still say it even when they know that it's not a good idea, and why also they have deceived themselves.
Right.
Okay, that's the sentence.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. So it is something that we are tempted to say all the time, especially as parents, as leaders in your own family. It's the type of thing that just kind of slips out. Do you think that it is just as profane for a parent to say it to their kids as it would be for a leader in their organization?
Yeah, I would think so. Yeah,
I would think so too.
Yeah.
There's judgment here for parents. Yeah.
Yeah. Part of the question is, well, then why would you say it? There's an element both for someone who works for you or someone in your family who reports to you, that you're like, I'm wiser and smarter. And why are you not listening to me?
Right. So the reason that the parents might have a temptation to say it more often and feel like it's excusable is because there is an age where kids do think they are smarter than their parents.
Yeah, right.
And when that realization comes that I should have listened to my parents, parents need to prove it. Parents need to feel like, they need to drill it in. I told you you're not as smart as that. And so for many parents, they feel like saying, I told you so is maybe the nice way of saying, I'm smarter than you are. You should listen more often.
Yeah.
But it really is. There's no real, there's no way to receive it in a way that's like, is there, and even as I read through the field note and thought of like better ways to say the exact same thing, there's hardly any way to phrase it in a way that makes it acceptable. You should just eliminate it from your vocabulary and your way of thinking completely.
Well, and we're actually, when you referred to the list of the other ways that people say this, and that's actually one of the most important parts of this field note is people are being like, well, I don't say that, but you say it in other ways, right? And so that's, but let me first address a thought that I had as you were talking about that, which is in the same way that you had this visceral reaction when I was just reading the name of the headline and saying, I told you so. And you're like, because you feel the judgment of that. We can't also conceive of a real world scenario where the response is the thing that would naturally, that we would want to hear, which would be like, oh, yes, you certainly did. And I heard it again and again. And somehow, despite the wisdom that you shared with me, I, in the dark blackness of my soul, decided to lean on my own weakness and self-centeredness and totally rejected the wisdom that you shared in your benevolence to me. And now I am suffering the irreparable consequences and the onslaught of shame and anguish that I now feel is beyond words. And so you have my profound apologies.
Never going to happen.
Has that scenario ever happened in any workplace?
The closest you would ever get is to, like, if you're tempted to knowing that you will be saying, I told you so, is just put a bet on it. Just lay $50 down on the whole scenario. And that way you don't have to say, I told you so. You just collect $50, right?
Right.
But
there's a leader out there who keeps thinking that one day I'm going to say this. And then everybody's going to be like, yes, you did. Oh, you were so wise. Why did we ignore you? So, okay, but let's get to the list, because it's a good list of what people say that is equally cringy things that would create the same reaction. But they almost feel like, well, I don't say I told you so, but I do say, I knew this would happen. I tried to warn you. What did I tell you? Just as I predicted. If only people would listen to me. I called it, not to say I was right. What a surprise. I hate to remind you of what I said. Figured this would happen. All of these are what the field note is calling "I told you so" in disguise.
Right. And so the key problem with all of those things, and with "I told you so" at the top, is that it frames your feedback by litigating the past first, which you never want to do in any type of feedback. So when you're going to intentionally say, let's go back in history and talk about the way that I told you we want to do it, right? So no feedback is best consumed that way. You're putting up walls and walls of resistance all the time in the way that you deliver horrible feedback like that. If you're going to intentionally frame it in the past by saying the only way that we can
rubbing people's noses in it.
Yeah. So, and I'm always going to be tempted, if you say that to me, is to litigate. What did you actually say? Like, and who cares about that? Like, if you're really going to have this conversation with me, it's about looking forward to the next time we come into contact with it. Why are we going to talk about the past, right? You're going to give me the opportunity to do nothing but say, well, you didn't really tell me so, right? Because what you said was this. And then all of a sudden we're having a really petty argument about the exact words that you use and whether or not you were right in being able to do that. And no leader actually wants that. What a leader actually wants is for people to ingest the right way to do it moving forward. And so you're cutting yourself off at the knees so often when you start with the past. And once again, saying "I told you so" is a framework around the past that you just need to forget about it. Leave it behind.
Well, we are going to talk about the way leaders should respond in these kind of situations here in just a second. But I read something recently, and let me see if it resonates with you, because I thought it was interesting. It was around this kind of very thing about, like, well, why do we say things like this? And particularly around, like, things that we feel that we are right about. And we sometimes think about, when we talk about dopamine hits, and we think about them in terms of social media, like, I put something out there and people liked it and they re-X'd it. What is the retweeted? What do they say now?
It's just post now.
I know, but repost.
What a loss.
That doesn't sound.
Everyone knew what tweet meant. Yeah, whatever.
Yes, right. So you've lost a whole marketing genius world. So the point being, when we as individuals say, "I was right, I was right, I was right," we're self-dopamine hitting. Right. This is like the rat in the cage hitting the thing to feed itself, like the dopamine hit, or like some liquid morphine or something, or cocaine. Didn't they used to do that to poor animals? Like right. Well, you're doing the same thing. You have this idea, I'm right, and everybody should know it. So when you say to your team or to your kids, "I told you so, I saw this was going to happen," you're saying, "I'm a genius, I'm so insightful," and then you start to feel better about yourself. You should feel worse, because you actually are destroying the relationship and the actual productivity and the chance for any actual valuable feedback that you have, or a way to make your kids or other people better. You're ruining that. So you should feel worse. But it actually is why it's so hard for many people to stop, because they continually feel this reinforcement of this vision of how they think that they want to be.
Yeah. I think the way that I hear people kind of do and say this most of the time is they retell their history. Even if they're good at not saying the words "I told you so," they'll kind of end up doing the same thing by saying, well, let's go back 12 months and actually talk about how this actually happened. This is what I said to you then, and that's how you responded to it. And then I said this, this, and this, but you wanted to go ahead and do that. And once you hear someone like tell that story of like the last 12 months 3 or 4 times, you're like, oh, that's just their masked way of saying "I told you so" all the time. But there's a real strong temptation in what you're saying to like want to be able to get my framing of the media, like how the story actually should be told moving forward. I want to make sure that everyone, when they think about this story in the past, that they understand it that in the way that I'm framing it moving forward. And it's just a hard thing to do. And I think the dopamine hits are there in a lot of different ways of people wanting to like, and most of it is what? Justifying their past actions as well.
Sure.
And
well, now let me double down and make it worse for leaders like this. And we're not judging those leaders because we're all, we can all have these temptations and do it. Sure. I've said these things to my kids, certainly, which is, yes, you have this problem that you're an addiction, you're addicted to your own dopamine. Yeah. But there is also, I think the concept is called hindsight bias. And the conclusion of that is when you say, I told you so, or I was right, or I saw this coming, many, many times you are deceiving yourself. Yeah. Even when leaders, and they've studied this in workplace situations, when they say, well, I said this and I outlined why all this, and they go back and they look and it's actually not the case. And people will overinflate later, like things where they were like, well, yeah, I'm not so sure, like who's going to win the election. Later, like, I told you we were going to win the election. Yeah. We spin it in hindsight in our favor dramatically. So it's not only that you like hearing the sound of your own voice saying, I told you so. It's that you didn't tell them so in many, many cases. And now you're actually telling a lie on top of that to yourself and deceiving yourself.
And if that's the case, then that many of us do that to ourselves, then every time you say, I told you so, you're reminding people how you rework the story, how you're lying to yourself. Right. And again, people are just going to, relitigate the past, which is not helpful for any organization, any group, any family you're part of. Moving
I think
the
one study that I had read about this a while back was, I think it was around like the confirmation of a controversial Supreme Court nominee, something like that. And people that later said, I predicted that person would be, approved and finally solidified on the court. And when they actually studied I don't know how they did it, but it was like, I think it was like 75% of the people said, I predicted that they would be confirmed, when actually it was something in the mid 50s. Yes. And so it was a 20% jump, or 20-point jump in this hindsight bias around what they actually had predicted. So
your up and down votes for stuff like that are hardly ever recorded. So
yes, correct.
Of course, you're going to soften when you're wrong. And myth making is a very common thing.
So the cautionary thing here is, it's not just that saying I told you so is leadership profanity, and it's destructive for all the reasons we listed. And that now that you're giving yourself this weird chemical addiction, and you're probably also wrong, then now the question is, well then, okay, a scenario where I say I told you so implies that something less than optimal has occurred. Your work decision, the output, the conclusion, the result of the project was in some way less than satisfactory. So now what? What is the way that the leader should respond that is not using the leadership profanity of I told you so? Your thoughts?
Well, there's sometimes like a specific phrase always in mind that it'd be good to have a trigger, right? So instead of like when you feel the I told you so coming out of your mouth, that you have something else there.
That's a good idea, right? Yeah.
Right. And so having a go-to phrase is probably good, just for that kind of a reason.
Yeah, right.
Do you like the phrase that is mentioned here?
Well, I mean, I think I don't know, it matters what the phrase is, but you're talking about the idea that a leader should actually be responding with some degree of empathy.
Right. Which is always better too, especially if you have the idea that I told you so might be coming. You're waiting for it to drop, and then it's never said. Then that feedback is logged away, probably in a more impactful way in the person that you didn't say it to, when it was obvious you could, right?
Yes. And if it's not only just saying, hey, I feel bad that this outcome, but well, what do we do now and how can I help? So if I'm offering you support and empathy instead of criticism and judgment, I've changed the dynamic. And then not if I just did that one time, but if I'm consistently known, not as a pushover, I didn't lower my standards or my expectations, but if when something has happened that was not what we would have liked, if my response is to understand that there's a tone of empathy, even if I'm not saying, well, that's okay then. I guess,
Right.
like, because that makes you a pushover leader too, right? But you can have a principled empathy, but a demonstration of support about where you're going to go on the bounce back.
Right. So I like the phrase that kind of encapsulates that empathy, just the idea of, well, what did we learn from it?
Right? Yep, that's a great one.
Immediately going into kind of debriefing it. Can I tell, we're 30 seconds over, but can I tell a quick story? I determined early on that I wasn't going to ever manage the DMV for my kids when they were learning to drive. I would teach them to drive, but if you don't know how to navigate bureaucracy, then I don't want you to navigate a motor vehicle. So it is their job to figure out how the DMV works, how to sign up for their appointment to get their permit, how to make sure that they have all their paperwork in order. I will drive them there. I will teach them how to drive, but I am not going to manage the rest of it. So I just had a son who we went on our trip to the DMV, and I knew he didn't have his birth certificate.
You knew the whole time, right?
I knew the whole time the 5 pieces of information that he didn't have with him. We showed up.
All 5.
The only thing he had was his Social Security card, but he didn't have his verification of enrollment form, and he didn't have his proof of residency. There's several different things that he needs. And so we showed up, and he's disappointed. Like, he's actually didn't read the email, didn't do anything, but because I set it up, I was never tempted to say, I told you so, because all I had the opportunity to say is, oh, what happened? Right. So I knew everything, but I didn't teach him any of it because I wanted the impact of it. So it's a refreshing thing to read this field note. Never say I told you so, because that's the kind of scenario where I should say I told you so, but I never told him anything. Right.
Yeah.
And so the only thing I had to say is, oh, well, what did you learn? Because and the over under in our family is 2.5 more visits to the DMV
before they get them all.
Right.
Are you managing the process? Are you doing the same on the real ID issue?
No. All of my adult children have taken care of that on their own.
Okay, great. Well, here's the sad part for everybody watching or listening today. Before we began today's edition of Lead Better, I said to Mikey, I know you're going to be tempted to go overtime with a story at the very end, and it's going to push us way past the time limit that we set for ourselves. And
our time's up now.
And here we are. So I told you so. I didn't do that.
Can't believe you did that. All right. We'll talk to you tomorrow.